Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Horological Society of New York Lecture Series. My name is Ed Heidman, and I am the Executive Director of the Horological Society. So, thank you all for coming, and as you see up on the screen, our sponsors, whom we thank very much. Okay. For anyone who has joined in the last month and has not had a chance to pick up your pin, we have them up at the front desk. So please pick one up. And if you're not a member, please feel free to join. Anyway. So we now have ties. As you can see, there's two guys at the front desk and me are all wearing our new Horological Society ties. So they will be available this evening after the lecture, but we will not be shipping them out. So if you want one, you can either pick it up this evening or stop by sometime. Okay. So our traveling education will be in New York on May 19th. And as of 5 o'clock this evening, we had one seat left. So if anyone's interested, I would recommend it very highly. They're very popular. We've sold out. We're sold out in Dallas. We sold out in Silicon Valley, and just in the last 2 weeks. Let's see. So without further ado, let me welcome William Massena.
Can I get the clicker? You don't have a clicker for this? No. Sorry, little technical. I just hit that. Okay, that's okay. All right. So good evening. Thank you for coming. The topic today is the Swiss watch industry, 20 years in the 21st century. I'm sure you all know we're in 2018. Why 20 years into the 20th century? We are 20 years into the 21st century because the 21st century really started in 1998. 1998 was a very important year in watchmaking. Most of you may not be familiar with it, but there was a huge crisis in watchmaking in 1998. And it happened in Singapore, where they started to have a monetary crisis. And a lot of the distributors in Singapore, because nobody were buying watches, the Singaporean dollar was going down the drain, the Hong Kong dollar was pegged to the US dollar, so they had less of a problem there. But a lot of those guys in Singapore were very nervous, and Singapore was already a huge market in the watch world, and the distributors were middlemen between the retailers and the brands, and those guys were buying the merchandise, and they were extremely nervous. So what they did is they dumped all their watches to the entire world. And you had a lot of small brands like Breguet that really suffered from this. All of a sudden, Breguet Type 20s were all over the world. People would buy Breguet Type 20s for $1,000, $1,500. Brands like Lange & Son were just starting to come out, had the biggest market in Singapore in 1998. They had one retailer in the US, and that was Cellini, and the biggest market was Singapore. All of a sudden, the Lange one, which had a crazy price of $12,000, was being traded at $7,000, $8,000. And the watch brand, the guys in Switzerland, were very, very fast to react. They realized really fast that this was something that they could not live with because the internet was already out. And people realized right away that you could get bargains in Asia. So an American guy that would normally buy a watch at Cellini, a Lange, will end up buying a watch in Singapore with a phone call for half the price. So what the brands did, and the groups, is they started buying the distribution. They realized how important distributors were. Before this, the brand would sell to the distributors, that would sell to a network of dealers. But after the crisis of '98, after what happened in Singapore, the brand realized that they had to buy the distribution network to control the product. So 1998 is an important year, and by buying the distribution, which brands hadn't done in the 500 years that they have existed before, they kind of changed the game for watchmaking. And 1999, the year after that, was also a very important year. I want to give you a little recall, and this is going to be fast, of the last 50 years of watchmaking. 1969 was the year of domination because it was the year where mechanical watchmaking was at its apex. You had the new mechanical movement, the automatic El Primero came out. It was an automatic chronograph. It was the most important automatic watch that came out of the last 10 years of the 60s, and it was extremely important. You had Omega, who had a watch on the moon, and in terms of marketing, that was very powerful, and we're going to go back to that in a few slides. But for Omega, it was an enormous marketing coup, and it was maybe the first modern marketing coup for a brand. Before this, they were maybe talking about the Olympics, but the true marketing birth, modern marketing of a watch brand happened in '69 with the Man on the Moon. And lastly, of course, is the Swiss came out with the quartz. The Beta 21 came out, and the Swiss believed that they had a shot at dominating the watch world for the next 20 years. 79, 10 years later, was a completely different story. Breitling went out of business. There's actually a great article I recommend everybody to read on Dinky, written by Joe Thompson about his first year at Basel World, which happened to be 1979. And basically, the article really shows you how dreadful Basel was for that year. Breitling went out of business. It was maybe one of the biggest companies to go out of business after a few more companies had gone out of business. And it was kind of the bottom of the Swiss watch industry. 89 was a very important year because it was a year of hope. It was the 150th anniversary of Patek, obviously. It was a year where people believed that there was a chance for the Swiss industry to come back. And a lot of companies started to buy back the history by releasing new watches, by increasing the production. 89 was that year. 1999 was the year of rebirth because you had a lot of brands that came out that year. The most famous one maybe for you guys would be François Paul Journe, who came out in 1999. Other brands were bought that year. Besides the distribution, you had some retailers in Singapore that also, after selling the distribution to the brands, got some cash. So what they did is they bought brands. The Tay family, who owns Hourglass, bought 2 brands that year, Daniel Roth and Gerald Genta. And that's going to be important because all of a sudden people reinvest the money in watches, in brands. So 1999 is definitely the year of rebirth for the watch industry, when you see those new brands coming up, the François Paul Journe, or brands being acquired or invested in. 2009 was obviously the year of crisis, was the year where the watch industry looked at it and decided that they could survive this. 2008 was a big test for them. 2009 was even a bigger test. It's maybe the first year where after basically 20 years of continuous growth, they saw a decline. And it was very short, it was very brief, and we all know that it was thanks to the Chinese market that it rebounded really fast. 2019, we have no idea what it is, and it's kind of not the topic tonight, but I want you to keep this in your mind when we talk about watches tonight and what 2019 will be. I'm going to do, what happened here? That's no good. I'm going to do 2 graphs like this tonight. Last year I did 20 of these. I think I bored half the audience. This year you're getting only 3 of those. This one is to just show you Swiss Watch Export. This is done by the FH, which is the Fédération Horlogère, not to be confused with the FHH, Fondation de Horlogerie. This is owned by the Swiss government. They're very dry people. They do a very bad job keeping account of this. Any watch exported out of Switzerland is accounted in there. So basically, if Christie sells a watch, it's in there. Because these are the export of Christie. So when Christie, for example, sells a watch to an American and that American export the watch, it shows up in there. So you have maybe $20 or $30 million of auction watches. Also, if you are a watch brand and you export a watch just for to show to a client in United Arab, the UAE, Dubai, and you want to show him a watch with big diamonds, that will show up in there. Even if the watch is returned, then it will still show up as exported in there. But basically, it shows you that there was a big growth over the last 17 years, and all of a sudden you see that it's not really happening in 2016 and 2017. The orange and the gray and green represent the three biggest markets. Orange is Hong Kong, USA is in gray, and China is in green. Just to give you the size of the top three market compared to the rest of the world. It's pretty well distributed if you think about it. China being the biggest today, because if you add Hong Kong and China together, it's obviously the biggest market. Just show you that it's not still moving the needle for the entire industry. This is a share of the Swiss watch market. It's basically the Western, the Western world versus the Chinese market, or Greater China, which I incorporate Singapore. Japan is also a big market. Now, this is basically just to give you an idea whom those watches are being sold to. Because tonight's lecture is not going to be about this. I'm not going to tell you and bore you for an hour about which market is bigger, which has the biggest share of the market. What I want to show you is we're going to look at watches, and I'm going to concretely explain to you why those watches exist. I'm going to basically give you an existential idea of why a watch was created and why they made that watch. Sometimes I'm sure you look at an article or you look at a picture of a watch and you're like, why on earth did they create this monster? Or why on earth did they create this beautiful artwork? And my job tonight is basically to explain to you why this watch exists within the context of the industry. I hope you're going to enjoy this. Okay, again, this is some statistics because I love statistics. But that's just to show you that out of the last 3 years, all big markets, these are the top 10 markets, all of them are going down besides China and the United Kingdom. The United Kingdom is a good reason is something called Brexit, and Brexit created a huge devaluation of the British sterling, and therefore a lot of people went in the UK to buy watches. The rest is going down, and keep that in mind also, that they're creating all those watches while the market is going down. Now we're going to go into the players. I'm assuming that most of the audience know who the big players are. You have the groups and you have the independents. What I'm going to show you today is that basically why and how the independents won the war, and especially how they won the war. And it's through the product, obviously. We're going to go through the product and the marketing, and I'm going to show you how the independents won the war. There's 4 groups. Actually, there's more than 4 groups, but we're talking about Swiss brands. So it's only 4 groups: Swatch, LVMH, KERING, and Richemont. There's obviously Movado, Citizen, Seiko, but these are not Swiss, so we're not talking about them tonight. All those groups control Swiss watches, except Richemont has a German brand called Lange, which we will talk just a little bit tonight, but we'll talk about them. We're going to start with Richemont. Richemont has a big portfolio of brand. Richemont, if guys you don't know, is basically a cigarette maker. Johann Rupert, father, Dr. Anton Rupert, basically created the modern cigarette filter. And he had this company called Rembrandt, and Rembrandt basically had this company called Rothman Cigarettes, and John Player Specials for the Daytona out here, you know what I'm talking about. And Anton Rupert and his son, Johann, realized that they had to diversify. And in the 70s, they diversified by buying Cartier and little watch brand there and their luxury product. And they realized that it was also an addiction like cigarettes, but it was much less dangerous. And they were very smart about it. And about 20 years ago, actually in 1998, Groupe Vendôme sold the last stake in Rothman to BAT, to British American Tobacco. So this is what's left. As you can see, a nice, nice bunch of watch brands. So 20 years ago, again in 1999, 2000, they bought Lange and IWC and Gégère Lecoutre from Video, basically with the sale of the cigarettes. They bought that. And today, they're basically the big kahuna. They're the guys that control the industry. The biggest hit of the brand, this is the number one. This is the number one story of the last 20 years. Whether you like them or not, whether you respect them or not, this is the story of the last 20 years. Officine Panerai was basically a store in Florence that was supplying the Italian military with watches. The reason is very simple. The Italians speak only Italian. They didn't go to Switzerland, and they stay in Italy, and they ask an Italian guy that was selling watches to get them watches. So that guy went in Switzerland, bought watches, and sold them to the Italian military and put his name on it. The company was going nowhere. Bonatti went to Cologny, who was the number 2 guy at the time at Richemont, and presented the idea of buying this company for $1.8 million. They bought it. They created this watch that you see here, the PAM 001. Huge watch, tremendously big. 44 millimeter. At the time, it was a monster. When I saw it the first time, which was in the summer of '98, and I bought it immediately, I thought it was the coolest watch in the world. It retailed for $1,800. Water resistant to 300 meters. And Sylvester Stallone was going to wear one in Daylight, the movie Daylight. That watch is basically paid off. There's an article, again, from Joe Thompson on Dinky, where he interviews Bonatti, and Bonatti explains that the PAM 21, which was a limited edition of 60 pieces that they made, paid for the company and paid for the tooling. This is just to give you an idea of the margins here. Officine Panerai today basically still sells the same watch. The problem is now they sell the same watch, but it's for women. Yes, for women. It's a 37 millimeter, and it's water resistant to 30 meters, which means it's not water resistant. Officine Panerai is basically kind of dead today in terms of a brand that was hot for 15 years, let's say. And Bonatti has resigned. He left the company this year after 21 years as president. And it's going to be a tough job for the next guy. I think in 20 years, people will come back to Officine Panerai, but this is to give you an idea how you paint yourself in a corner. You basically redo the same watch over and over again, and you create a different limited edition and a different market. After a while, people get bored. And this is what happened here. And Officine Panerai is not the only one who have done this, but so far they're the only one who are really suffering through this. We're going to see other examples of people who have been doing this, but have been doing this much more successfully than Officine Panerai. And I will explain why later. The problem with Officine Panerai is after a while, you cannot sell the same watch over and over again to the same guy. You have to move on and grow your market. And Officine Panerai did not understand that. But Vacheron Constantin is trying to now. Vacheron Constantin introduced a watch called the 56 this year at Basel. And the one on the left is the three-hand watch with Le Fleurier, Val Fleurier movement. Val Fleurier is a movement that is made in-house by the Richemont Group, mostly for Baume and Mercier. You can find the same movement in a $3,000 watch, except it's not stamped Vacheron Constantin, and it doesn't have a gold rotor. They sell basically the same watch with a better movement for $17,900, so basically 55% more. And if you look at them from the face, any of you guys maybe in this room can be able to tell me the difference, but a guy in the street will not be able to tell you that you're paying an extra $6,500 just to know which day of the week you are. Sure, the movements are different, but still. Now, another brand that Richemont bought is Montblanc. Montblanc is a pen maker, and they decided about 15 years ago that they were going to make Montblanc a watchmaker. First, they've tried to make Montblanc a leather maker, a bag maker, kind of the Hermes of Germany. So what they did is they literally bought the Hermes of Germany. There was this brand called Seeger, and Seeger was a small leather maker in Germany that was making those kind of soft lamb product, passport wallet, things like this. And Montblanc went to them and they basically bought them out, Richemont, and incorporated them in Montblanc. And 3 years later, Seeger was gone, and Montblanc was the biggest maker of wallet in Germany and elsewhere. So after doing this and doing a pretty good job with this, they decided that they were going to buy Minerva, which was one of the oldest companies in Switzerland, making movements, and they were going to do the same thing with them, buy them, forget the name, and incorporate it. So today they're making basically the same watch, but at 3 different price points. The one on the left is not really the same watch because it's a quartz watch. It's a smart watch, if you want, where the screen you're looking at is a screen, an LCD screen. The one in the middle for $3,200 has the ETA movement, and the one for $36,000 has the Minerva movement. Now, I'm sure you guys can make the difference between a chronograph and a non-chronograph, and between an automatic watch and an LCD watch, but your casual looker will not see much difference between the 3 watches. They're all 3 made of stainless steel. Oh, actually, I'm wrong. The $1,000 watch is made of titanium. But they're basically made of easy metal, and the difference in the product is pretty hard to understand from a non-watch, let's say, collector or aficionado. And fairly well, Montblanc has been doing fairly well with these. The $36,000 watch is still having a hard time with, because a lot of people are kind of criticizing that Montblanc has gotten rid of the Minerva name and has stuck with the Montblanc name with it. But Montblanc has fairly good results with this. The big problem that they have today is with Cartier. I know I'm going pretty fast, but there's a lot of slides. Cartier has been a big problem for the Richemont group in the last 5 years. The growth hasn't been there, and they made a big bet about 10 years ago that they were going to go really high-end. Tourbillon, mini repeaters, fancy schmoozy watches. They hired Carole Caspier-Forestier, which is maybe one of the best watchmakers of a generation. And Carole has come up with a lot of really neat stuff, but nobody is buying. Watch collector is looking at it saying Cartier is a jewelry business, not a watch business, and people that like Cartier jewelry are not interested in buying $500,000 watch. So what happened with Cartier, the last 5 years, they are trying to go back into the bread and butter that made them pay for everything that they used to do well, which is the $5,000 to $10,000 watch. 5 years ago, they introduced a Clé de Cartier in steel. You can see the watch on the left. It's kind of roundish, but not exactly roundish. It has, all the DNA of Cartier. DNA is a word you're going to listen a lot with me tonight. DNA is a favorite word in the watch industry today. The DNA here is, you can basically see the Roman numerals, the hands. You look at the hands and the Roman numerals are exactly the same. Position of the markers are kind of different, but are the same kind of markers. On the left, on the Clé de Cartier, they are on the outside. On the Drive, which is a new watch they introduced last year, they're on the inside. But you're basically looking at the same watch with a little bit more money. And the Drive de Cartier will most likely replace the Clé de Cartier in the next, let's say, 18 months to 2 years. The Cartier is trying really have a lot of hopes on that watch and trying to make that watch the next big thing, because they're having a very hard time with the next big thing. Now, the next big thing for a very long time was the Cartier tank. The one on the left is a Tank Française, very famous watch, launched in New York in 1996. Don't ask me why they launched a French tank in New York, but that's what they did. That watch for 20 years, well, maybe not for 20, but for 15 years was the biggest seller for the entire Richemont group. The Tank, this is a medium size. All 3 of those tanks are medium size. The one on the left, the Tank Française, was for a very long time the best seller for the entire Richemont brand. They introduced the Tank Anglaise about 5 or 6 years ago to replace the Tank Française, but everybody knows that the English cannot replace the French. So the Tank Anglaise has been an extremely poor show for the Tank Française, which was obvious from the get-go. You will notice also that they're very similar watch. This year, they have reintroduced the Tank Américaine, which is American, so it's bigger, it's stronger, and it's more expensive. Tank Américaine is a remake of a watch they made in the 80s. And again, they did a little bit in the 90s, and they also call it Tank Cintré to look a little bit cooler. But it's basically something that Richemont and Cartier are hoping to go back to the long and strong hit that was the Tank Française. They also introduced this year at SIHH the Santos and the Panther. The Santos on the left is men's version of the Panther on the right, or the Panther on the right is a woman's version of the Santos on the left. You can see the screws around, basically the same position. You can see that the hands are similar. You can see that the DNA of those Arabic numerals. The Santos and the Panther are basically another try at doing a hit with Cartier. Cartier think, a lot of the marketing around it is that maybe the problem with the Tank is that a man doesn't want to wear a woman's watch, and a woman doesn't really want to wear the name of a man's watch. They don't exactly know what Tank is now, so they thought that maybe they'll do two different models and give basically the same watch and give two different names, and that people would buy them. That was Cartier. We're going to the Swatch Group. Swatch Group is kind of a different story from Richemont. Banks, when the watch industry went bankrupt, banks ended up with all those watch brands, and they hired this guy called Nick Hayek. And Nick's job was to basically tell them what they could salvage or not. Nick went back to the bank and said, hey guys, I'm going to try to salvage everything for you. And he did. The guy was a genius. He really did. And he passed away 10 years ago. And now his kids are running the show. His older son, Nick Hayek Jr., is running the industrial part of Swatch. Swatch makes most of the watch movement in the watch industry. And Breguet, and the Swatch watches. While Breguet, Blancpain, and Glashütte is run by the grandson of Nick Hayek, which is Mark Hayek, who run those three brands. And Nayla Hayek, the daughter of, and the daughter of Nick Hayek, is the chairman of the board, and she runs Harry Winston. Swatch, for a very long time, had the monopole on watch production. But about 15 years ago, they basically pushed the brands to go and invest in their own production models, buying and making their own movements, because Swatch believed that they could not produce enough movement for everybody. And that had tremendous impact in the watch industry. And we'll talk a little bit about that later on. But to stay in that kind of idea, Swatch had bought Blancpain in the early 90s. And from Blancpain, they inherited a guy who is a genius, called Jean-Claude Biver. Jean-Claude Biver had reinvented Blancpain, and he basically bought Blancpain and made it like this super rare watch brand. And Swatch loved it, so they bought it, and then they took Biver and they made him go and run Omega for them. If you look at the James Bond Omega, that's Biver. If you look at Cindy Crawford wearing an Omega, that's Biver. When you see a personality wearing an Omega, that's Jean-Claude Biver. All of this marketing stuff, all the stuff around the Speedmaster anniversary, that's Jean-Claude Biver. So Swatch, for a very long time, kind of relied on that marketing and to sell watches. But they had this big, powerful movement, factories ready to create for everybody. this is the Speedmaster Pro anniversary. Basically, every 5 years or so, or 10 years, or depending on the mood, Omega released a limited edition of the watch in 9,999 pieces. I pull out those three, the 25th anniversary one, $2,300, just to give, so that was in 1994, because the moon landing was July 1969. The 30th was in 3,500, and the one 10 years ago was for 5,950. There will be a new one next year. I guarantee you that that watch will be around 8,900, 9,000 bucks. Now, the high end of the company of Swatch is Blancpain and Breguet. I pull out here two watches that they make, one for Blancpain, one for Breguet. It's the GMT alarm. You basically have the same watch, but with different branding and different habillage. Habillage is a French word that I absolutely love. It means dressing up. Habillage is a word that's used in the watch industry on every day. It's a jargon watch. Is you change the dial, you change the numerals, you change things around, you do an habillage, you dress up the watch. And basically what you see here is a dress up of the watch. You have basically the same watch, but completely different branding with completely different history, completely different. Breguet and Blancpain have nothing in common besides being owned by the same group and starting with the letter B and being both watchmakers. But yet, they end up making the same watch with a different story. One was made for the Tsar of Russia. The other one was made in the mountains of Villeray. But that gives you very much of an idea of the last 20 years of what they did in marketing. They will, and production, they will produce a watch and create a different storyline for you to buy depending on how interested you are in the buy line. LVMH. LVMH is truly one of the new guy in the watch world as a group. LVMH is definitely the biggest and strongest of all the luxury group in the world. It's French. It was founded by Arnault. Bernard Arnault started by running his father's fabric factory, and then with the help of a few friends, he bought LVMH, Louis Vuitton, and then he bought Moet and Hennessy in the 80s. And now he owns the biggest conglomerate of watch brand, of luxury brand in the world, and is one of the 10 wealthiest men in the world. Bernard Arnault came very late in the watch industry. There were rumors for years that the only one he was interested in buying was Patek Philippe, but Patek was not a seller. So Bernard went and bought Hublot from Biver, so he got Biver. He bought TAG and Zenith, and he also bought Bulgari a few years back and Chaumet. We're not going to talk about Bulgari tonight, and we're not going to talk about Chaumet. Bulgari is a great story, but it's way too early to judge. But we're definitely going to talk about Hublot, TAG, and Zenith. Now, those three watches that you see here each have the DNA of their respective brand. You have the Hoyo Carrera on the left for $5,400. You have the Zenith D5 for $9,950, and you have the Unico 42 millimeter for $17,800. As you can see, these watches are completely different. Anybody in the street will look at those things and can really distinguish the DNA of each brand. All three of them look exactly the same. Actually, I'm so confused this year at Basel is I had to look back at pictures that we were taking in order to know what I was talking about. And I've been going to Basel for 30 years. But this is a genius idea. Why is this? Because you take one product, you see if it does well, and then you multiply it in different price groups. The Unico 42 millimeter is definitely the leader here. The Hublot Big Bang Unico basically got their appeal, and when they realized that people were liking that watch, what did they do? Well, they started making it but at a cheaper price point. You basically have, of course, you have different definition. Of course, you have different movements, but you basically have the same product. You're basically sending the same message across. You have a different story. You have a different marketing behind it, but you basically have the same look and the same product. The question is at what price are you ready to pay for the watch? Well, here you have three choices. Scoop. Hublot is going to make more limited edition. Now, in this room, I would be extremely impressed if somebody can tell me what limited edition that watch is. Anybody wants to take a hit at that? No? I'm going to give you a hint. Business Week talked about this watch this week. There was a big article in Business Week about this specific watch, and they could not pull a picture of this. They couldn't get the picture. And I got the picture today. No? Nobody? Nobody. This watch was made for a Swiss boarding school. This watch is a limited edition made for a Swiss boarding school. $30,000 or a month of tuition, 2 weeks of a kid's pocket money. This is not for the parents, this is for the kids. The article in Business Week explains to you that this watch was made for the 15-year-old kid who will go to this prestigious Swiss boarding school who makes the best of the best. I went there. That watch is sold to those kids. And when they made the deal, they put a Hublot watch in every school cafeteria. And the idea in the article, at the cafeteria I learned today by trying to pull a picture of that watch, but the idea was, in the article they explained, is to basically train the kids early on the Hublot brand. The idea is that in order to grow, Hublot has to go somewhere, and basically the only way to go is you go younger and younger and younger. So the youngest you get your clients, the best you are. So the Collège Jules Léman limited edition watch, 30,000 Swiss francs. Email me if you want to buy one. And I have a feeling, speaking of this, that the next idea for Hublot would be Hublot ID. Like Nike ID, there'll be Hublot ID where you can make your own Hublot and they will ship it to you. I bet you this is coming before 2020. KERING. KERING. KERING is really the last guy who came. I mean, they grabbed whatever they could. They grabbed Gérard Perregaux when Gérard Perregaux lost their Ferrari license. They went and grabbed Ulysse Nardin when nobody was basically left Ulysse Nardin. And then there's Jean Richard is the Tudor of Gérard Perregaux. I don't even think it exists anymore. But basically, KERING is those three brands. KERING bought Ulysse Nardin, and Ulysse Nardin is an amazing story because they made a watch that is really unique and iconic. Another word you're going to hear a lot tonight, iconic, with a lot of DNA. It was introduced in 2001, and it's called Le Freak. It's a 7-day power reserve carousel that basically the entire movement moves on itself for an hour and indicates the minutes, and that big gold thing that you see, and then that big arrow next to it, which is pointing to 10, is the hours. It was introduced in 2001. It had a huge success with the press. It had pretty good success also with collectors, mostly in Russia. But it's truly an important watch for one thing. It was the first watch that was made with silicone. And that watch had a profound impact on the industry, not for the look really, actually a little bit for the look, we're going to go through that later, but especially for the silicone, where people realized that they could use different material and that it could be a good marketing tool. Gérard Perregaux is a different story. Gérard Perregaux lost the Ferrari license, which was basically the bread and butter, and they have been struggling ever since. They got a new CEO, and last year, so in 2017, they relaunched the Laureato. And I copy-pasted this from their website. The Gérard Perregaux is putting the Laureato in its rightful place. The unique design of the Laureato, very famous for its unique design, and it's truly an iconic watch. I'm going to show you a picture of the Laureato. It's the one on the right. The iconic and unique Laureato was created truly in the 80s, but then it was a big bomb. So they stopped doing it. They reintroduced it in the early 2000s. It was a huge bomb again. So they stopped making it and decided to relaunch it last year in a limited edition. case he bombed again. And he didn't. So now they have a whole line of Laureato. They have a chronograph Laureato, Laureato this, Laureato that. That's all they sell anyway. And as you can see, it's really a cross between the Royal Oak and the Nautilus, but at a much better price point. It has bracelet of the Nautilus and the look, more of the dial of the Royal Oak, that hexagon-shaped thing. They're doing well with it. That's what we hear, and I believe it. I think the reason is you have to be on the waiting list for so long on those other two watches that, well, at the end of the day, you're better off buying a Laureato. Which means a laureate, by the way, in Italian, if you didn't guess that. So this is where GP is today. They're basically they're making iconic watches. This was it for what the, allocated time that I have for the big groups. Now we're going to go into the winners. The winners are the independent. And we're going to talk about the independents. And obviously, we're not going to talk about all the independents, but we're going to talk about a few of the independents. And you're going to see that they make things very differently, the independents. Here's Rolex, the biggest and meanest of all the independent. Rolex, founded by Hans Wilsdorf, blah, 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 blah. It's a foundation. They don't make money, blah, blah. They don't make money. They just mint it. These watches were released this year at Basel. You will see that they basically created the same watch, but in 4 different price points. Actually, it's more, because I will explain why it's more. But you have the Tudor, which is basically a Rolex for $3,900. You have the stainless steel for $9,000 to $50,000, and $9,000 to $50,000, 10 Gs get you a Rolex today. If you want to show that you're a little bit richer than a guy who can afford $10,000 watch, you can buy the two-tone for $14,000. And then when you're really rich, you can buy the gold one for the price of 3.5 stainless steel one for $36,000. And then if you're really, really rich, you can buy one with diamonds or sapphire, rubies, and it goes on up to about $250,000 where you have different price point. Now you're looking at this and you're saying, what's the difference between what those guys are doing and the groups and Biver with those Carreras that looks like those Hublot? Well, it's very different because this is very simple. It's gold. You're paying more gold. Therefore, you're paying more money. It's not like a brand and it's not like they're confusing in terms of price. Here, it's very simple. Whether you're from India, Korea, Japan, South Africa, the US, whatever, Peru, you understand it. More gold, you're richer. And that equation is very straightforward, kind of like Apple. It's like simple. You got the iPhone X, you got the bigger iPhone, the small iPhone. It's all about size, and here it's all about gold. The second big winner is Royal Oak. Audemars Piguet is the accidental winner. It's the guy who won the lottery, and you have no idea how. They basically got that product and they're minting money with it. And the reason is very simple. 17 years ago, in 2000, 20 years ago, basically, Audemars Piguet made 3 moves that were very, very small. Move number 1, they sold their 40% interest in Jaeger-LeCoultre to the Richemont Group. Yeah, they own 40%. And the Richemont Group gave them $400 million for 40% of Jaeger-LeCoultre. So all of a sudden, they have $400 million, and this is a small company with small family in the mountains of Le Brassus, and all of a sudden, those guys have $400 million. Well, they take $5 million, maybe even less. We don't even know exactly for how much. Some people told me $1 million, and I would believe this. And they go and they sponsorize this guy. This guy was has never been outside of a lake. And this guy is telling everybody, I'm going to win the America's Cup. And we're all laughing at him. And Bertarelli is like, yeah, I'm going to win it. And Audemars Piguet said, we're going to sponsor you. We're going to give you a few $1 million. And the guy who had never been out of a lake goes and wins the America's Cup from the Americans. Hadn't happened in 100 years, but the Swiss guy did it. And basically, Audemars Piguet was behind it. And they used that as a marketing tool like crazy. That's the second time they basically won the lottery. Then they won the lottery a third time. And the third time was when there was these 2 guys who came to them and say, hey, can you help us? We want to help this small company called Richard Mille, and they're trying to make this watch, but we don't have enough money to basically make those movements, the kind of weird carbon fiber stuff, and we need more money to be able to do this stuff. And they were like, yeah, here's some money. And they ended up owning a piece of that. But they're a one-hit wonder, and the one-hit wonder is still, making money for them. The question is, when is this going to stop? And it will stop one day, but the question is when. And so far, those guys have been the luckiest bastards in Switzerland. Then you have the king. Now, Patek Philippe, which released a watch this year that you can see on the right side, the reference 5740. It's a Nautilus perpetual calendar. It's a cross. It's basically what if the 5711, the one on the left, that Nautilus, mated with the 5324, the perpetual calendar right in the middle. If those two watches mate, they will create a third watch. You will notice that the sum of those two watches is less than the price of that gold Nautilus. It's about 117,120, I think. And for an extra $2,000, you have the privilege of buying just one watch. They have a waiting. I talked to a retailer about this, and he told me on the Wednesday that the watch came out, he had so many people, serious people, want to buy this Nautilus. Patek is the king. How can they do this? I have no idea. Actually, I do have an idea, and I'm going to show you. And where we're going next is really what I want you to remember from this lecture. I want you to remember this watch. This is the pilot watch from Patek Philippe. They released this watch at Basel this year, but they released a white gold version of that watch 3 years ago in 2015. It's a very controversial watch. When it came out, everybody was like, what? Why are they doing this? Some people went on Ondinki and wrote articles about how ugly the watch is and how Patek should not have made that watch. The question is, Patek created that watch as a tribute to the aviator watch that Patek has made. Because Patek is very famous for making aviator watch. Actually, up to 3 years ago, very few people had heard that Patek had made an aviator watch. Patek made no aviator watch. Patek made 2 prototypes in the 30s, but they never made them. Patek made those 2 unique prototypes, and they're not even watches. They are sidereal timers. They help you calculate your position if you're a pilot over the Earth using complicated calculation and an hour angle, basically. And based on those 2 watches that are sitting at the museum, they created this new watch called the Pilot Watch, and it's a huge success for them. I mean, among us, they're so proud of repeating that to me every time I see them, that they're so proud that this watch came out. And it's an important watch because we all know that today, basically, the luxury market, the luxury watchwear is those kind of watches, sporty yet not a bit dressy. This is kind of the watch where everybody wants to be in. And Patek did this, and they created pilot watches. And you think, well, that's kind of cool. Patek did pilot watch, but they were not the first one. Patek were actually the last one to create a pilot watch. IWC and Zenith did it much longer and much better than them and much cheaper. And they basically created the market. IWC, which belonged to Richemont, created the market of pilot watches about 20 years ago. And they marketed that watch like crazy. You see advertising of that watch everywhere, how cool and how much you look like a Sylvester Stallone with that watch, or Schwarzenegger, and it competes with the Panerai. And IWC made that watch and sold it in the $10,000 range for the last 20 years, basically. Then IWC came and tried to sell the same product, but in a lower price point, around $7,000, 5-6 years ago. What did Patek do? Patek basically doesn't market that watch much. You don't see ads with Patek and a pilot wearing the watch. Patek created a pilot watch, and you buy it or not, but the marketing is already there. IWC and Zenith already did the whole marketing for you guys. You guys know that it's a pilot watch because the marketing has been made. Patek doesn't need to reinforce that marketing. The marketing is there. And that's a genius move. That's where you go the higher of the market, where you have the most margins, and you move there right before anybody else, and you're basically there, and you enjoy the position that you are, selling a watch 5 times the price than any other watch, and you stay there, and you're like, yeah, I'm Patek Philippe, and I enjoy this. The problem is, Patek Philippe was not selling pilot watches, but there's another brand that was selling a lot of pilot watches during the war, and that's Lange. And this is why it's genius. Lange should have introduced that watch, but Patek Philippe cock-blocked Lange. Today, Lange comes out with that watch. They're going to look like idiots. They're going to look like they copied Patek. But no, they didn't copy Patek. Patek has that position today. Patek is the pilot watch at 50 grand. Lange cannot go there. If Lange wanted to have a cool, luxury wear, modern, sporty watch, well, they can go with a historical Lange BR. Patek has that position. Patek basically stole the idea from Lange and did it their own. In Germany, they still have no clue that this happened. Now, one of the last guys to talk about tonight is Richard. That smug guy here, Richard Mille, not Mile, not Mille, Mille, created a company in 1999, and this guy is a genius. He created this company, and he makes watches that in the $100 to $1 million. First price is $100,000. Average price is about $500,000. His biggest seller is a $500,000 watch. Richard Mille started his watch brand 15 years ago, actually 17 years ago, and has been enjoying great success ever since. I'm sorry, I want to show you something before that. As you can see on that picture, Richard is wearing a watch, and for 100 meters, you can see that it's a Richard Mille because he has a tonneau shape. And tonneau shape is something that Mille watches are famous for. You can spot a Richard Mille watch far away because of his tonneau shape. But of course, Richard also created round watches. And at Basel, 2 years ago, I asked him, I say, these are not good sellers for them. And they're in the $100,000 to $200,000 range. They're round. And not a lot of people are buying those because basically they don't look like a Richard Mille. A Richard Mille, you're expecting a tonneau watch, not a round watch. So I went to Richard Mille 2 years ago at the SIHH, and I asked him, why are you still making round watch? Nobody wants round watch, and you make very few watches. This is a waste of a movement. He says, no, it's important. I have clients that want a round watch. They wouldn't buy anything but a round watch. And okay, I was like, okay, fine, whatever. Then I got home and I was thinking, why will Richard Mille still continue making round watches when he's basically sold out and everything that is tonneau shape is still making a round watch? And then something hit this year at Basel. What will Richard Mille do next? Yep. That round watch looks great for LVMH. That round watch goes right above everything. That round watch basically makes Richard Mille the best target for LVMH. It will fit very nicely as the same product at a different price point, but basically the same product as that Carrera for $4,500 or $5,500. So the conclusion, my iconic decades of unique DNA, it's very simple. First, have you noticed? No more Bar Mitzvah watches. The round watch with the little small second, nobody cares. Nobody wants one. If you want a watch for your Bar Mitzvah, you ask for an Apple Watch. You're not going to ask for a watch that looks like your grandpa's watch. That's the first lesson you have to learn of the last 20 years. And the second one is, if you want to be independent, you have to be big, expensive, or you're dead. And the last two pictures that you see here is Breitling who's coming back, and we'll see how they do as an independent, where they're going to be big. Most likely they're not going to be expensive, and there'll be the big test as if an independent can be stay independent by being big and inexpensive. And the other one is a brand like Max Busser, and BNF, where it's going to be expensive, but can he stay expensive and not be dead if the watch industry continues its slides for the next 3 or 4 years. Thank you. Questions?
Hands. Do you have any comments about which brands have been particularly successful working with automotive manufacturers and which ones have not?
Yeah, that's a good question. The idea of the relationship with watch brands and cars has always been there. I mean, the last 15 years, Jaeger was kind of the first one to do it with Aston Martin. I personally think that's a bit like the HUBLOT, where you can sell a few limited edition to a few guys and then you have to move on. I think it's very hard to co-brand a product, especially in the luxury brands. You can do collaborations, but I think it has to be limited and in time and in product. I don't think long-term you can really have both working well together. Like Breitling and Bentley has been doing it, they've been doing it for 15 years. And I think after a while it gets diluted for both of them. Anybody else? Yes?
I've noticed that this year with Madison Watch Week, I've noticed that Apple is now participating in it.
I'm sorry, with?
Madison Watch Week.
Okay.
And the thing is that, all the brands, like the watch brands that are on Madison Avenue, and I've just noticed that Apple is now participating.
I didn't know that.
In that, yeah, and because it's the first time I've noticed, and I was just wondering what would your thoughts be, especially since they said, well, we just beat out Rolex and all of that.
Well, Apple is the first watch brand in the world now. There's no question that the first in dollar terms, are the first in number terms. Apple is the watch brand. I believe, and I know it may sound very pessimistic, but I believe that we are all potential philatelists, that basically there's going to be a generation of people collecting watches, and like there are a generation of people collecting stamps, and then we'll be gone, and there won't be anybody else to pick up. I'm very pessimistic about the industry. I'm pessimistic because of the stuff I just pulled out. I'm pessimistic because basically it's all marketing, it's all image. The product itself is not that important. Sure, you have, there's a lot of small manufacturers, there's very small independents that can do product for you, but those guys are tiny, it's artisanal, it's like a tailor making a suit. They will not be able to get really big, they will be restrained by the size and the quality of the product. Big brands would be just marketing machine, and I don't think that this can really survive as a model. I think it's like using a Virtue phone today. You cannot do that for a very long time. It's not sustainable as a business.
That was a great hour, very entertaining and knowledgeable. Thank you for that. Can you talk a bit about Tudor and how they've been successful the last few years, their use of spokespeople, celebrities, and distinguishing themselves from Rolex? Obviously I had Olia now, and I could do a lecture every week about this. But Tudor, for last 5 years, were trying to be the rebel. They were trying to do everything that Rolex couldn't do. And every time we'll go see them at Basel, they will tell us, oh yeah, we're doing stuff different from Rolex. We don't want to be Rolex. And this year we went to see Tudor, and we sit down, and the first thing they told us is, oh, now we are aligned with Rolex. Now we're going to be Rolex, and we're going to be proud of being Rolex. And it's a GMT. And basically, it's Tudor went and did that thing for a few years, like the people in Pennsylvania, they go for a year, and they go see the world, and then they have to come back in the fold, if you know what I mean. Thank you, the Hamish. Well, Tudor did this thing, that they went crazy for a few years, and now they're coming back in the fold, and now basically Dufour, the new CEO of Rolex, told them, guys, it's finished, the game is over. Yeah, you can have Lady Gaga, that's fine. But you have to do what we're telling you to do. You have to go back to do basically the same product we're doing, but in a cheaper interpretation of it. The $3,900 GMT is a great watch. There's no question about it. You're not getting a Rolex, but you're basically getting a Rolex by the name. It's in-house movement. It's a great product. If I had to recommend somebody to buy a watch today that is not in the watch business or doesn't intend to be a watch collector, I would recommend that Tudor. It's great money, great watch for your money. But it's not that great company that's going to be different than Rolex. It's Rolex. Now it's really Rolex.
What are your thoughts on Omega and Speedmaster as far as them releasing a new limited edition, you know, all the time, and they're adding like a women's version and a smaller size and a bigger size? I just want to know your thoughts on that. If they're
yeah, it's as I mentioned during the lecture, it's kind of a different tactic on the same effect as Carrera, as selling a watch, the same watch with a different brand name. They sell you the same watch with the same brand name, with the same story over and over and over again. And they just tweak one thing. They tweak a bezel, or they tweak the color. They introduced a black watch this year, a Speedmaster Moon, completely black, skeleton movement. It kind of looks a little bit like a Carrera, actually. And a very cool watch in ceramic, and it's $2,000 cheaper than the first ceramic they made 2 years ago. So they're playing with buyers and collectors. It's very well done. This is going to be a collector watch. The 60th anniversary watch is an amazing watch when you think about it, because it's exactly the same watch that they sold us for $1,500, for $3,000, for $5,000, for $10,000, and now they sold it $7,800. They're basically doing what Panerai could not do. They're reselling you a watch because it's a classic, and they're repackaging it differently every year, and you're still buying it. It's habillage, you know, different suit.
Thank you. I just wanted to make a comment when you had sort of compared Rolex to Apple, saying it's very easy to understand. I think to iPhones you were comparing it.
Yeah.
But actually Apple Watch does that too. So they have their standard. I think they only make 3 or 4. They make a standard, and I think they make like a gold and a rose gold, and it's very simple to understand why they're more expensive.
Yeah, they stopped doing the gold watches, Apple. Now they're doing the ceramic one at about $1,000. But obviously, Apple took the cue from Rolex, where you had the aluminum one, and I think the stainless steel one, and then you have the ceramic one, and then you had the gold one. They stopped doing the gold. I don't know why, because I heard that in Asia, the gold did pretty well on Apple One. And now they're sticking to just those 3. It doesn't mean they won't reintroduce a gold one later. Yeah.
I'm going to sneak 2 questions in here. In your discussion about the Richemont Group, you mentioned that they sold the same design for just too long. What is the ideal length of time for a design? The second question is about micro brands. Do you think micro brands market is just too saturated, or is there enough room?
I'll admit 2 things with your 2 questions. I'll admit that originally I made 100 slides. I reduced it to 48. One of those slides was about the number of watch brands in 1970, in 2000, and in 2018. Obviously, it's approximative, but in 1970, you had 1,700 watch brands. In 2000, you had about 400. And now you're back to about 750 brands. The question now is, how do you consider yourself a watch brand? I can go tomorrow and call Massena watch company, and I'm a watch brand in Switzerland, and then maybe people will buy a watch from me, and I put something together and I sell a watch brand. And there's too much of this. There's definitely too many people trying to sell the same product and confusing people. You're basically in Istanbul, and you're a tourist, and you're in a souk, and 5 guys are coming up with the same carpet and giving you different price point. You just don't want to buy anything. You know you're being ripped off. That's for the watch brands. That's my opinion on that. And your first question was about? How long can a design be out? Yes, and that is about the shelf life of a product. Patek and Rolex, the independents, have a shelf life of about 7 years. The 5960 that was introduced in 2006 was replaced gradually starting in 2013. They replaced them gradually, but Patek is about 7 years. Rolex is about 8, 9 years. Now they start to do 7 also. That's basically the rule. Audemars Piguet is obviously 45 years or more. But yeah, they tweak with the product every 7 years. IWC has 7 different collections.
And they rotate them. Every year at SIHH, they present you the novelties for one of the new collection, and they go around in a circle of 7. They said that this year, that Kern left, they're not going to do that anymore, but I thought it was a good way of doing it, redoing the collections every 7 years.
I'm also somewhat greedy, and I have 2 questions, if you don't mind. The first one would be about the comparison in terms of quality, not value, retention, or anything between Patek and Lange. I would like to hear your thoughts about that. And then going back to a brand that's kind of like branching out from their typical business, Hermès, have been launching some interesting watches in partnership also with Agenor. And I wanted to hear your thoughts about, like the history behind that brand in terms of like wristwatches.
Lange and Patek could be a whole lecture of mine. I'm a fan of both brands. I'm a bigger fan of Patek than Lange. I think the reason is because for a very long time I thought Lange was going to take Patek. The example of the BR is typical of what I thought Lange under Blumlein would have done. Blumlein would have never left Patek do this. Blumlein the day, actually it happened. The 5070, the Patek 5070, 50, actually I'm wearing one today, the first chronograph that they reintroduced in 1998, was Patek reacting really quickly to the datograph. Patek knew, because it was the first new mechanical chronograph introduced in 30 years, Patek knew about this. The whole industry knew about this. So Patek tried to spoil it for Lange by introducing in 1998, a year before the datograph, the 5070. The Cyclemania movement, they marketed extra large. They did very well with it. And it was kind of to spoil it for Lange. And back then, in terms of quality, 20 years ago, Lange was pulling Patek out of the water. I mean, there was no question 20 years ago there was it. I still think that this is the case today, and the very simple reason is one is doing 60,000 watches, Patek, and the other one is doing 7,000. And the numbers are so different that Patek has to go into an industrial production, which Lange can still have some artisanal production. But I think that Patek has caught up a lot with Lange. I think Lange has created a fire that Patek needs or needed in order to come back. I mean, 20 years ago, Patek was doing that watch right here, the 3919, that was the bread and butter. They had just introduced the annual calendar, the 5035 in 1996. But basically, that's what they were selling, those 2 watches. And Lange coming pushed Patek into getting those semi-complication and all those watches, the wall timers, all those watches, which kind of pushed the market and everybody with them. So I will say in terms of pure quality of the product in comparison, I will go for Lange. But in terms of brand and cohesion, I will go with Patek. That answers your questions. And your second question, I'm sorry? Hermès. Hermès, I think, suffers from what everybody else suffers from, which is the fact that it's not born a watch brand. It's kind of like Montblanc. But I think Hermès is much smarter and better. Hermès has that thing, that aura that a lot of brands envy. Even Patek envy Hermès for that. But I think in terms of watch company, it's very difficult to be at that level. You cannot buy being a watch brand. That's kind of what really, Montblanc is the example. You cannot come with all the money in the world and say, I'm going to be a watch brand. You know, you have guys that they go and say, I'm going to be a race car team, and they put all that money, and all of a sudden they have this car team, and they can race, and they can maybe win the World Cup of auto racing or whatever, or car or boats or whatever. Watches is not like that. There's a savoir-faire, there's a history that you cannot buy. Lange, they were able to do it, but I think today we can see that still Lange has a problem with this, where they created that watch brand because it was not a watch brand, and the marketing still suffers today because of this. Lange is the best product, but not a very good marketing. And all new guys have this problem with the marketing.
All right, this will be our last question of the evening.
Hi, good evening. Thank you for speaking with us. At the end, you didn't sound too optimistic about the possible future of the watch industry. And I'm wondering, what you're seeing in, they're selling, let's see, like Rolexes in the last 6 months, or some of the watches with wait lists. Are you seeing some like control and distribution to try to prevent the situation in Singapore, or like 2009 Jean-Claude Biver interview where he's saying you have to keep buyers hungry and frustrated? Is there something like this going on?
Last question, and I think a very good question. Yeah, I'm here and I'm saying, oh, things are not going to get well. And I mean, Patek has huge amount of watches in wait lists. 5711 sell at twice retail. Rolex has 5, 6 watches that sell above list price. Yeah, it sounds great. But before being a watch collector, I consider myself an economist. And the reason you have this is there's so much money out there. It's like you can borrow money for nothing. Is you have an economy of buying stuff. Everybody can buy, everybody can afford, everybody can leverage. We're back to 2007. Whether we like it or not, we are the same level that we were in terms of buying stuff as we were 10 years ago. And people are going that crazy. I mean, the auction prices, they turn out selling at $100,000. It's insane. I see that as insanity. I think that a guy who goes and buy a 5711, which is, that watch right here, the one at 29,800. Right now they sell, I thought, at 50. Somebody told me they're now trading at 60,000. I heard that John Reardon think they're going to go up to 80, which I think is very plausible. This is not sustainable. You cannot have a watch that sells for $30,000, which in the street already sell for $60,000, go to 80, and not think that something is not wrong. And I think that's what's dangerous, is you have a few watches that sell for a lot of money to people hungry for those watches. I personally sold that watch. 2 weeks ago, I sold this watch, the Royal Oak that you see, but a different version of that, the Ultra Flat, which retail for $22,000, and I put it on Time Zone, and I put it at $28,000. I got 61 people emailing me within a day. Obviously, it was $6,000 above retail, but obviously I could have asked 30. I'm sure I would slap, but sold the watch. Sold the watch, but it really shows you that the guy who bought it for me emailed me with a lot of questions. There was no question about the watch or the movement. All the question was, why was I selling the watch? And I was like, why are you asking me this 20 times? And the guy says, because I'm really worried that if you sell that watch, it means it's not going to go up in value, that you think the value is not there. I was like, it has nothing to do with that. I'm just bored with that watch. The value, I have no clue where it's going. But this guy was buying the watch just because he thinks it's going to go for more money. There was no interest in the watch itself. He never asked me if I had the watch overhauled or if it was scratched. None whatsoever. Yeah. Thank you, guys.
So just one last thing before we go. Next month, June 4th, the CEO, Gregory Dourd of Height Watches. If you don't know what they are, I suggest you Google them because they are pretty fantastic. Probably one of the most spectacular technologies I've seen in watches in a long time. So thank you all for coming.